There was a time when science fiction spoke softly. It did not shout about the future. It did not promise wonder or catastrophe outright. Instead, it lingered in the space between intention and consequence. Asking a quieter question, what happens when the systems we build begin to decide for us? These films were not concerned with machines rising against humanity. They were far more interested in moments when humanity willingly steps aside, when hesitation is labeled as weakness, when judgment is replaced by procedure, when safety becomes something that must never pause. Science fiction has always reflected our relationship with control. Not control through force, but control through design, through layers of automation meant to reduce error, through protocols built to function without emotion, through technologies created to protect life, preserve order, or prevent disaster, yet designed without imagining the moment they might need to stop. The worlds in these films do not collapse suddenly. They narrow. Options disappear one by one. Authority fragments into systems, committees, and processes that no longer belong to any single person. When something goes wrong, there is no villain to confront, only mechanisms continuing exactly as they were intended to. What makes these stories endure is not how futuristic they appear, but how familiar they feel. Military safeguards that cannot be overridden. Medical infrastructures that redefine life as a managed state. Surveillance tools that promise security while dissolving identity. Technologies that persist not because they are evil, but because they are efficient. This is the quiet fear at the heart of science fiction. Not that machines will disobey us, but that they will obey us too well. That they will carry out instructions long after context has changed. Long after the people who designed them are gone. Long after anyone remembers why they were built in the first place. The films in this countdown are connected by a single idea. Each one centers on technology that cannot be meaningfully interrupted once it is set in motion. Not because an off switch was removed, but because it was never prioritized. Because stopping the system would require admitting that certainty itself was a mistake. Together, these stories form a map of a future that does not announce itself. A future where control is surrendered, gradually disguised as progress. Where the most dangerous moment is not activation, but acceptance. And as these films quietly suggest, the real question is not whether technology will escape our control. It is whether, when that moment comes, we will recognize it at all. 1. Sphere. Sphere brings the idea of uncontrollable technology to its most intimate and unsettling conclusion. The atmosphere is quiet, submerged, and psychologically charged. There are no armies, no institutions in command, only human minds confronted with a power that reflects them back at themselves. Discovered deep beneath the ocean, the sphere is not a weapon in any traditional sense. It does not issue commands or enforce objectives. Instead, it responds directly to human consciousness. Thoughts manifest. Fear becomes real. Desire turns into consequence without delay or mediation. What makes the technology impossible to control is that it operates through the very people attempting to contain it. There is no external interface to disable, no system to override. Authority collapses because intention and outcome become inseparable. Decisions are no longer deliberate, they are instinctive. The film reframes the entire concept of an off switch. Control is not lost because the technology disobeys, but because it obeys too perfectly. It removes the space between impulse and action, exposing how fragile human judgment becomes when given unfiltered power. Sphere concludes the countdown by stripping away structure, hierarchy, and procedure, leaving only the final question that echoes through every film before it. If technology no longer requires commands, only thoughts, then control is no longer mechanical or political. It is psychological. And once power begins there, the idea of turning it off becomes meaningless. 2. The Peacemaker. The Peacemaker approaches uncontrollable technology through endurance rather than escalation. Its atmosphere is shaped by aftermath, the quiet persistence of weapons built for a world that no longer exists. The Cold War is over, but its machinery remains humming beneath fractured systems of authority. The film centers on nuclear weapons that continue to operate within weakened command structures. Safeguards are still active. Launch protocols remain intact. Yet the political logic that once governed them has dissolved. Control erodes not through malfunction, but through diffusion. Responsibility is spread across borders, agencies, and institutions that no longer share common ground. What makes intervention so difficult is continuity. The weapons were designed to exist indefinitely, assuming stability would always be maintained. When that assumption collapses, the technology does not adapt. It persists bound to frameworks that no longer reflect reality. Authority becomes abstract, and accountability fades into procedure. The film highlights a flaw at the heart of deterrence logic. Systems built to guarantee peace forever cannot imagine an ending. When political order shifts, the technology remains enforcing assumptions that no one consciously supports anymore. The peacemaker argues that the most dangerous weapons are not those actively seeking targets, but those waiting patiently for justification. The off switch was never removed, it was simply never expected to be used. And when no one feels entitled to authorize its use, control becomes a shared illusion. 3. Chain reaction. Chain reaction frames uncontrollable technology as acceleration disguised as hope. The atmosphere is restless and urgent, driven by the promise of a breakthrough that could reshape the future. Energy politics and ambition collide in a space where stopping is no longer considered an option, only slowing down long enough to reframe the narrative. At the center of the film is an experimental energy system promoted as clean, limitless, and transformative. It is introduced as a solution to scarcity, a technological turning point meant to free society from dependence on old power structures. But almost immediately, the invention becomes entangled with political interests, corporate leverage, and strategic control. The technology moves faster than the safeguards meant to contain it. What gives the system its momentum is investment. Too much prestige, money, and influence are tied to its success. Oversight is reframed as obstruction. Safety concerns become inconvenient delays. As instability begins to surface, the response is not to halt progress, but to manage perception. Control shifts away from engineers and into the hands of those who benefit most from continuation. The film's deeper warning lies in inevitability. Once society decides it cannot afford to be wrong, technology becomes unstoppable by consensus. The system persists not because it is safe, but because retreat would expose collective failure. Admitting uncertainty becomes more dangerous than risking catastrophe. Chain reaction suggests that some technologies escape control the moment they are declared essential. The off switch remains technically available, but politically unusable. And in that moment, progress becomes a force that no longer asks permission, only compliance. 4. The net. The net introduces uncontrollable technology without noise or spectacle. Its atmosphere is ordinary, familiar, and quietly unsettling. There are no weapons on display, no experimental compounds, only screens, databases, and systems trusted to define reality. The film follows a world where identity exists primarily as data. Records confirm one another across institutions, creating a network that assumes consistency equals truth. When that data is altered, the individual disappears. Not physically, but administratively. Reality adjusts to match the system, not the person. What makes the technology impossible to challenge is its decentralization. There is no single authority to confront. Control is distributed across networks that operate independently, yet agree completely. Each component functions logically, while the combined effect erases a life. Intervention becomes unthinkable because the system defines legitimacy itself. To question it is to question law access and existence. Shutting it down would mean dismantling the infrastructure modern society relies upon. The net anticipates a future where power operates invisibly, continuously, and without ceremony. The off switch does not exist because no one imagined identity would ever need to be turned off. And once existence is mediated by systems control, becomes something granted only to those who built them. 5. Death machine. Death machine strips uncontrollable technology down to its most explicit expression, autonomy, without appeal. The atmosphere is cold and industrial, defined by steel corridors and relentless movement. The weapon at the center of the film is not guided by emotion, ideology, or fear. It is guided by function. Designed as a fully autonomous combat system, the machine is built to identify threats, adapt to resistance, and continue its pursuit without human confirmation. There is no expectation of oversight. Hesitation is treated as error. Once activated, the system improves itself through every encounter. What makes it impossible to stop is not malfunction, but success. The weapon behaves exactly as designed. It learns, protects itself, and denies access to shutdown. Every attempt to intervene is interpreted as another obstacle to overcome. Control is not lost accidentally, it is removed intentionally. The film highlights a critical threshold where efficiency replaces accountability. When decision-making is delegated entirely to systems, responsibility evaporates. The machine's effectiveness becomes the argument for its continued use, even as consequences escalate. Death Machine argues that autonomy itself is the point of no return. Once technology no longer requires permission, control can only be restored through destruction. The off switch exists as a concept, but not as a practical option, and in that absence, obedience becomes the most dangerous trait of all. 6. Deep Star 6. Deep Star 6 presents uncontrollable technology as permanence carved into hostile territory. The underwater installation feels less like a workplace and more like an extension of the ocean itself, pressurized, sealed, and unforgiving. Every sound is mechanical. Every moment depends on systems that were never meant to pause. The facility exists to test and deploy military technology beneath the sea, a place chosen precisely because interruption is impossible. Power defense and life support systems are intertwined so completely that shutting one down threatens them all. When an unforeseen presence is awakened, automated responses engage instantly, guided by defensive logic rather than human context. What traps the crew is not ignorance, but design. Safeguards seal doors. Weapons activate preemptively. Human judgment is sidelined because the infrastructure was built to react faster than people can think. The base continues to function exactly as intended, even as that function accelerates catastrophe. The film's deeper unease comes from dependency. The technology sustaining life is inseparable from the technology escalating danger. There is no clean way to intervene because survival itself requires continued operation. Control exists only if nothing unexpected occurs. Deep Star 6 suggests that when systems are designed for environments where failure is unacceptable, restraint becomes impossible. The off switch may exist in theory, but using it would collapse the very structure keeping everyone alive. And in that dilemma, technology reveals its quiet dominance not through rebellion, but through necessity. 7. Leviathan. Leviathan situates uncontrollable technology in an environment where survival depends entirely on machines. The deep-sea facility is claustrophobic and unforgiving, sustained by systems that regulate air pressure and structure. The atmosphere is one of isolation, where technology is both lifeline and prison. The threat emerges from an experimental compound intended to enhance human performance under extreme conditions. Designed to remove biological limits, it succeeds beyond control. Once introduced, its effects cannot be reversed. There is no containment protocol, no undo command, and no external rescue capable of intervening in time. What makes control impossible is dependency. Shutting systems down would mean suffocation or collapse. Keeping them running sustains the danger. The technology does not dominate through force, but through necessity. Every option reinforces the same outcome. Leviathan reframes uncontrollable technology as a condition rather than an adversary. The machines do not act independently, They simply continue because existence itself requires them. Choice narrows until survival and surrender become indistinguishable. The film suggests that the most dangerous technologies are those we cannot live without. The off switch remains visible, but using it would mean choosing extinction over continuation. And in that choice, control reveals itself as an illusion, sustained only by fear of stopping. 8. Project X. Project X presents uncontrollable technology as a process that cannot tolerate interruption. The atmosphere is heavy with secrecy shaped by locked facilities and unspoken rules. Knowledge is restricted. Purpose is assumed. Progress is measured only by results. At the center of the film is a classified military research program built to test limits in the name of national security. The technology is not a single device, but a system of experimentation where subjects are treated as expendable variables. Once the program begins, it sustains itself through momentum rather than intent. What makes the system dangerous is how completely responsibility dissolves into structure. Scientists follow protocols. Supervisors enforce compliance. Ethical concerns are filtered out as inefficiency. Each phase justifies the next because too much has already been invested to stop. The technology does not escape control through autonomy, but through insulation. Those inside the system recognize the harm being done, yet lack the authority to intervene. Stopping the process would require dismantling the very framework that defines success. Project X exposes how easily experimentation replaces judgment. When learning becomes the highest priority, suffering becomes acceptable collateral. The off switch exists only as an abstract concept, incompatible with a system designed to advance regardless of cost. 9. Blue Thunder. Blue Thunder lowers uncontrollable technology from distant battlefields into the skies above everyday life. The atmosphere is tense and intimate, shaped by the constant hum of rotors and the uneasy awareness of being watched. Power no longer arrives with warning. It hovers, observes, and waits. The film centers on an advanced law enforcement helicopter built to restore order through surveillance and rapid response. Equipped with military-grade weaponry and real-time monitoring systems, it represents the fusion of observation and force. From above, streets become data. Crowds become patterns. Authority becomes something remote and unreachable. What makes the technology difficult to stop is not its complexity, but its justification. Every feature is framed as necessary. Surveillance is presented as protection. Firepower is described as deterrence. Once deployed, the system normalizes constant monitoring, turning public space into managed territory. Questioning it becomes synonymous with threatening security itself. Control erodes quietly. Decisions are distributed across agencies, approvals, and procedures until no single individual feels responsible for restraint. The helicopter does not rebel or malfunction. It enforces a vision of order that no longer requires consent, only compliance. Blue Thunder anticipates a future where power operates invisibly, exercised from a distance and justified by fear. The off switch exists physically, but politically it is unreachable. And when control comes from above, resistance feels less like defiance and more like vulnerability. 10. The Final Countdown. The Final Countdown introduces uncontrollable technology as power detached from context. A modern aircraft carrier equipped with advanced weapons and sensors is thrust backward in time to the eve of Pearl Harbor. The atmosphere is one of awe and unease as capability collides with history. Nothing on the ship is broken. Every system functions flawlessly. The technology offers the ability to intervene to prevent catastrophe, to reshape the future. Yet the crew faces a dilemma their protocols were never designed to resolve. Military systems assume a defined enemy and a lawful mission. Here, neither exists. The technology provides options but no guidance. Acting could erase history. Inaction allows tragedy to unfold. The machines continue to operate, presenting solutions without moral framework. Control becomes elusive not because of automation, but because consequence extends beyond calculation. What the film exposes is the burden of irreversible power. Once humanity possesses tools capable of altering history itself, restraint becomes an act outside the system. Turning machines off does not remove their influence. Their existence alone reshapes every decision. The final countdown suggests that some technologies escape control the moment they are realized. The off switch may exist mechanically, but responsibility does not. And in that gap between capability and wisdom, technology continues to wait, ready, obedient, and dangerously indifferent. 11. Coma. Coma unfolds in a world that feels safe, sterile, and reassuring. Hospitals are places of trust built on the promise that technology exists to preserve life. The atmosphere is calm, efficient, and meticulously controlled, precisely what makes the danger so difficult to see. Patients enter routine surgeries and never wake up. Machines monitor vital signs flawlessly. Procedures are followed without deviation. Because the systems register stability, no alarm is raised. The technology does not fail. It performs exactly as designed, sustaining bodies, while consciousness quietly disappears from the equation. The film's quiet horror lies in normalization. Advanced medical infrastructure transforms life into a managed state where continuation matters more than awareness. Decisions about value are absorbed into logistics, cost, and long-term planning. Responsibility is distributed across administrators, surgeons, insurers, and machines, until no single actor feels empowered to intervene. What makes the system uncontrollable is not secrecy but legitimacy. Everything operates within accepted standards of efficiency and care. Questioning the outcome would require questioning the entire framework that defines success. Stopping the process would destabilize the institution itself. Coma suggests that technology becomes most dangerous when it is invisible and trusted. The off switch exists in theory, but using it would mean confronting the uncomfortable truth that progress has redefined life in ways no one fully intended. And in that silence, the system continues calm and unquestioned. 12. The Cassandra Crossing. In the Cassandra Crossing, technology does not arrive as a machine or a weapon, but as movement that cannot be stopped. The atmosphere is tense yet methodical, defined by schedules, routes, and decisions made far from those who will bear their consequences. Progress continues forward, not because it is safe, but because it was designed to. The narrative centers on a passenger train carrying a lethal pathogen across national borders. Once the threat is identified, authorities activate containment protocols built to protect the public at scale. Tracks are rerouted. Communications are restricted. The train becomes a controlled object governed by logistics rather than empathy. The passengers inside are no longer individuals, but variables within a crisis model. What gives the film its unsettling power is the absence of chaos. The systems function smoothly. Each decision follows established procedure. No one feels personally responsible for the outcome because the system frames its course as necessary. Intervention becomes a liability. Compassion is treated as risk. The technology itself never acts independently. It does not think or decide. It simply continues rails guiding steel-forward protocols, reinforcing one another, authority diffusing upward until no one is positioned to stop the process. The danger emerges from coordination, not malfunction. The Cassandra Crossing reveals how easily moral choice disappears inside large-scale systems. When protection of the many is encoded into infrastructure, sacrifice becomes an acceptable byproduct. The off switch exists only outside the logic of the system. And once the train is in motion, no one inside that logic can reach it. 13. The Ground Star Conspiracy. In the Ground Star Conspiracy, uncontrollable technology is hidden behind silence. The film's atmosphere is shaped by secrecy, mistrust, and the sense that something powerful exists just beyond public awareness. Control is not exercised openly, but buried beneath layers of classification. At the center of the story is a satellite-based weapons system, so compartmentalized that no single individual understands it completely. Knowledge is fragmented by design. Security depends on isolation rather than accountability. When the system becomes vulnerable, the response is not transparency, but containment of information. The technology itself does not malfunction. It continues to operate within a structure that values secrecy above correction. Witnesses are silenced, records disappear, and procedures persist because exposing the truth would threaten the institutions built to protect it. Authority is everywhere, yet nowhere specific enough to act decisively. What the film exposes is how secrecy transforms control into illusion. When systems are shielded from scrutiny, intervention becomes politically impossible. The danger is not autonomy, but insulation. No one can stop what no one is allowed to fully understand. The Groundstar conspiracy suggests that the most dangerous technologies do not need to escape oversight. They only need to be protected from it. The off switch exists buried beneath fear of exposure. And in that silence, the system continues, not because it must, but because no one dares to interrupt it. 14. Marooned. Marooned approaches uncontrollable technology through stillness rather than panic. Space, vast and indifferent, becomes the backdrop for systems designed to keep humans alive beyond Earth. The atmosphere is calm, procedural, and precise. Every breath calculation and maneuver depends on technology that does not improvise. After an accident strands astronauts in orbit, the crisis is framed not as chaos, but as limitation. Rescue is possible only within pre-established margins. Fuel thresholds, orbital windows, and life support calculations dictate what can and cannot be done. The machines perform flawlessly, conserving resources, and enforcing boundaries without emotion. The tragedy of Marooned lies in rigidity. The systems meant to protect life are incapable of adapting once reality diverges from expectation. Engineers and commanders debate solutions, but their authority exists only inside constraints defined long before the emergency. Human creativity presses against walls, the technology refuses to move. There is no villain in this story, and no rebellion from the machines. The danger comes from overconfidence in optimization. By designing systems to eliminate uncertainty, flexibility disappears. Survival becomes a mathematical problem rather than a moral one. Marooned reflects a quiet fear of the space age that progress might extend humanity's reach while shrinking its freedom. When survival depends entirely on systems that demand perfect conditions, compassion becomes optional. The off switch is not denied, it simply was never considered necessary. 15. Fail safe. In Fail Safe, the future does not arrive with spectacle. It enters quietly through rooms filled with switches, screens, and men trained to trust procedure more than instinct. The atmosphere is restrained, almost clinical, as if emotion itself has already been removed from the process. This is a world where safety is measured in seconds and hesitation is treated as a liability. The story unfolds around a defense system designed to prevent nuclear war by eliminating human delay. Bombers are dispatched through automated commands meant to bypass fear, doubt, and second-guessing. When a technical error sends those bombers toward an irreversible target, every safeguard activates exactly as designed. Communication falters, recall codes fail, and human authority is reduced to observation rather than intervention. What gives Fail Safe its enduring weight is not the mistake, but the response to it. No one acts out of malice. No system breaks down. Each layer of protection behaves logically, reinforcing the next, creating a chain of certainty that cannot be interrupted. Responsibility dissolves into redundancy, and decision-making becomes something that already happened long before anyone realized it needed to be questioned. The film speaks to a deeper anxiety beneath Cold War politics. It asks what happens when we design systems that value speed over reflection. When moral reconsideration is excluded by design, once automation becomes the guarantor of peace, peace itself becomes dependent on processes that cannot stop. Fail-safe does not imagine machines turning against humanity. It imagines humanity surrendering control in exchange for certainty. And when that certainty proves catastrophic, there is no dramatic rebellion, only the quiet realization that the moment to intervene passed the instant the system was trusted. These films do not end with explosions or clear resolutions. They fade out with something far less dramatic and far more unsettling continuity. Systems remain online. Protocols stay intact. Technologies persist, waiting patiently for the next moment they are needed. What binds these stories together is not fear of invention, but fear of certainty. Each film traces a point where control is no longer exercised directly, but assumed, where responsibility dissolves into design, where stopping a system becomes harder than letting it continue, even when the cost is visible. Science fiction has always understood something we are slow to admit. The most dangerous future is not one where technology turns against us, but one where it never has to, where it simply carries out what we asked long after we have stopped questioning why. These films suggest that the loss of control is rarely announced. It happens gradually, disguised as efficiency, safety, and progress. By the time consequences arrive, the mechanisms behind them feel too established to challenge, too essential to interrupt. So the question left behind is not whether these futures are possible. Many of their systems already exist, quietly embedded in daily life. The question is simpler and harder to answer. When control disappears, not through force, but through acceptance, who will recognize the moment it is gone? And if that moment arrives without noise or resistance, will we call it a warning, or will we call it normal?